what we say or think that we value may not actually be what we're demonstrating in our behavior. And if those are really far off and we're trying to be connected to our values and doing things, that ends up grinding at us and being this, what's known as a values conflict.
Are you listening?
This is the Rob Scott Show.
Damn.
I mean, really, like, if we're not trying to change the world, what are we doing?
Yeah.
All right. Hey, welcome to the Rob Scott Show. Here we are. What's up, Sarah? How are you today?
Doing pretty good, Rob. It's great to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Yeah. So let's get into this. I happen to know today what we're going to talk about. I normally don't. What would you like to talk about?
Well, today I think we're going to talk about values. And
Nice.
I think this is a great topic because we've often been referring to knowing your values as kind of a hack for procrastination, communication, better relationships. A lot of the topics that we've discussed in the past, a way we can say we can, our listeners can help themselves through whatever that struggle is to know your values. And I started thinking about that and I thought, that might be a little bit more complicated. There might be a little bit more there. So I wanted to dedicate this episode to talking about values.
I love it. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because if you just think about values, it's funny because as a coach, I know how crucial these are to get better performance out of people. And we'll go into why that is and some shortcuts and hacks and ways to get all the juice out of this. But I feel like, and I don't really have data on this, but I feel like people hear this and they may not care about it very much, right? It doesn't seem that interesting. But if you think about literally what the word means, right? Value, it's literally like what you value, right? And so it clearly should be something that we're paying attention to, that we're connected to. And what I find in working with people is if you were just to say, hey, what are your values? What do you value? People don't really have a clue. They don't have kind of a list in their back pocket. They're not really sure what's going on. And if you don't know what your values are, what matters to you most, the world ends up feeling more difficult to navigate. It feels busier, more complex. You end up, I keep talking about how overwhelmed we are with decision fatigue and too much choice and all the technological options and all the different communication coming in at us. The people that are really productive and are clear, they've got a clear vision. They know what matters to them. They're dialed in. And through that, they can cut away or cut through the noise and perform, right? And really get to what matters most to them and ultimately be productive, do all these different things. Those that aren't as clear tend to get much more overwhelmed by physical clutter, digital clutter, time clutter, etc., and end up lost, kind of not knowing what to do next or what's going on. And can, even if they're working really hard, it doesn't end up being as productive because it's not toward what matters most to them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There's a clear knowing your values. And I like that you said, well, what matters to you? Because that's kind of a question that we could play with. And I think often people would say, hey, I know what my values are.
Yeah.
And if you say, okay, what matters to you today? What do you want to get done in the next 10 minutes? What do you want to get done in the next month? How are you going to prioritize? What are your top 3 personal goals over the next, 24 hours? I bet there would be a lot of people that are like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
And like you said, we've been talking a lot about decision fatigue and overwhelm and stress. And those are the kind of things that I people are writing in and saying, how do I get past the procrastination? How can I kind of get some clarity? How can I get focused? Oh, you got to know what matters, AKA your values.
Yeah. Yeah. And that goes further down into specific goals and what your vision is and all that. I think what happens with values is there's one stage where maybe we don't know what our values are at all, right? We're just not clear. If we're in a relationship with somebody, we may not know what they value.
Right.
If they value very different things than we do, we might have a ton of conflict and not be able to speak into it or even be conscious of why that is, what's going on. We may then, maybe a little higher level up is we actually think we know our values, but they're not really, they're what we think we value, but actually through our behavior, it's not how we show up at all. And it turns out that that's not really what we value. And ultimately, if that's misaligned, we end up with what is called values conflict. And that just feels like a grinding. That's another level or a different level of suffering. And then there's the people that I was trying to describe earlier that are like super clear on their values. They know exactly what matters to them. They're living into them. They're acting on them. And they're cutting away the things that they don't value, that aren't important to them. And that's a much more productive, clear, focused, powerful, life. And so this is a real shortcut to sit down and work through what really matters to you. And then not only what matters to you, but in what order, right? You might pick 3 or 4 or 5 things that are super important to you, and then checking, well, which one really matters the most, right? Because these may not all work together, right? So it might be like honesty, trustworthiness, loyalty, hard work, whatever these are. And you find out that, well, of those, trust is the most important, even over hard work. If those were to, if working hard meant I had to lie about something or whatever, right? So knowing what those are gives us a lot of clarity if we have no clue of what they are.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it made me, made me think of a question that's not on the list, but I'd love to talk about the difference between values and goals, but also kind of maybe we can explore where values come from and how they're influenced.
Sure. So, I think nature and nurture are always in the conversation, meaning, we show up with some genetic factory settings, whatever, maybe in some way there's some personality stuff that's in there from the beginning, all that. And then, and we're also finding that on a genetic level, we can help some of those genes express and not. And, we're just beginning to discover how that may or may not affect behavior and what happens to us biologically and all that. So this is an interesting topic, nature versus nurture, right?
Right.
But beyond that, what happens on top of that is how are we raised, right? What were the values of our parents? How did they talk about money or honor or, being loyal? Or was it valuable in your family to be a cheat or to, not pay your taxes or whatever that stuff is, right? So we get that programming, and we may find that it's valuable to us to go along with that and be part of our family tribe. Some of us reject that for whatever reason, and we find that we don't agree with our family at all, and that influences how we pick. And we may end up getting really embarrassed in school, or something hurts our heart, and because of that something becomes super important to us. And so these things are happening to us, and the normal adults in the world today, I don't know that they're necessarily conscious of the root back to where these things started. And I don't know if they would take them on if they could realize that these are editable to some degree. These are things that you can go in and decide on more than just discover, right? So not to just keep talking about it, but that's almost another point, is that I think a lot of people feel like these are only in the factory settings and I need to discover what they are, and they're immutable, unchangeable. I'll always value these things. And that's not true at all. You can actually decide, hey, this is more important to me. I want to put that up. And for this year or this month, I'm going to decide to really honor and value health and work on my health and make that more important in my life, and see what that changes, right? See who I become and what I grow into as I work on that. So, I think that values come, and we, however moral we are or immoral we are, et cetera, those things are all things that we can play with and, number one, discover, but also sort of create and choose, and then move them around and decide what's most important. And that's a really valuable process.
Yeah. Well, I think that probably goes along with when people have expectations of this is how I should be, and they don't realize that it is flexible and changeable, and kind of at maybe the best expression of it. If you think about your values and or, to make it even simpler, what matters to you, right? What matters to you when you're in high school is different than what matters to you when you're in college, which is different than what matters to you when you get married and when you become a parent. And so, if you can kind of let the pressure off a little bit and realize that, of course, your priorities in life are going to change, and those may or may not inform kind of what you value or what matters to you in the moment, that might help ease a little bit of this, I have to be this person, and this is the expectation I have of who it's supposed to be, and this is what my parents said it was supposed to be like, and this is
I wanted to kind of call that out, right? That parent thing is huge for many of us, and again, it could be kind of unconscious to us, but your parents might have been instilling their values onto you their entire life, and to some degree you've tried to take them on, or you're acting and taking them on. Maybe you took a job because that's what your family wanted you to do. I think the old stereotypical story is I became a doctor and I never really wanted to be a doctor, but my family wanted me, or I became a lawyer because everyone in my family is a lawyer. And it's really important to, as we become adults, to really make those decisions for ourselves instead of defaulting to what other people wanted for us, or the people that raised us, what were their values. And it may be important to honor those and say, that's my family, that's where I come from, and that does matter to me. But if it doesn't, you need to be honest about that and step into, hey, I don't want to be a doctor. I really want to be an artist, or I really want to be an author, or I really want to be this other thing. And, why is that? Well, because I value creativity, and I value, helping people feel joyful instead of being healthy, or whatever those things are, right? So we definitely want to figure out what matters to us, right? What we truly value.
Right. And any time. And so maybe this is a good time to ask you about if you could talk a little bit about behavioral or enacted values versus espoused values.
Yeah.
Throw some more clarity on that.
Yeah. So let's say level 1 is, I don't know my values at all. There's a good exercise of actually going and finding a list of values and maybe starting to circle some of them and saying, oh, well, that one stands out. That one definitely matters to me. And this one matters to me. And you might come up with a list of 10 or so. You might pick, start ranking them, and then pick, maybe these are my top 5. And these are actually my top 5 in order. And they may be honesty, hard work, loyalty, whatever they are. Okay. And then that person is actually lying to their boss, laying on the couch, health is another value. Let's say they're eating Cheetos, right? So what we think our values are would be known as our espoused values. These are what I say matter to me. And I actually really believe these are my espoused values. This is what I want to be my values and who I would like to be, in a sense. But then my behavioral values may be completely different than that. I may really value not sharing my whole self with other people, which could also be known as sometimes maybe lying, right? I may want to be at rest and not hardworking. I might instead value, my time and my space and watching TV or whatever. So what we say or think that we value may not actually be what we're demonstrating in our behavior. And if those are really far off, and we're trying to be connected to our values and doing things, that ends up grinding at us and being this, what's known as a values conflict. And in that values conflict, it is, again, I'm supposed to be this, but I'm not that. So I start feeling really bad about who I am and how I'm showing up. And so maybe the move at that point is to be more okay with who you really are, be more honest about it, right? So as we're deciding what our values are or discovering what our values may be, don't make them wrong. Right? If we think they're supposed to be this because dad wanted them to be that, or that's what I think it is, and then I find out, wait, I actually value this other thing. Can you back up and just make it okay that that's actually what you value in this moment, right? Before you even try to change it or behave differently, let's really get honest about what do you really value. And in that discovery, you may find, wow, that doesn't serve me. Or let's say I have 2 things that I truly value, but they're in conflict, right? I really value, I don't have a great example off the top of my head, but I really value health and I really love eating sugar, whatever.
Right,
okay.
Right.
Or I really love relaxation.
Or maybe value,
rest.
Fine eating or something.
Sure. In some way, all of a sudden it's like, wow, these 2 things that I really care about, how can I figure out what are the roots of even why I care about those so that I can resolve this so that I'm not in conflict in my life, right?
That I feel like is the story of my life.
Does it? Yeah.
Finding 2 conflicting values, feeling like I can't resolve it, having to dig in.
Yeah.
Like, where is this coming from?
Yeah. And
that's funny. I never thought about it that way, that's what that feeling of kind of inner conflict is. And, people who are extremely self-aware are probably people who are like, well, here's exactly what it is. This value intersected with this value, and they're both coming from separate places. And now I'm having the courage or having the awareness or the bravery to be like, all right, I'm going to rank these just so I can get past this block. And maybe people who are less self-aware are just feeling like, oh, I don't know,
Yeah.
I don't.
And well, how about this one? Like, you might really value being liked or being popular or whatever. You might also really value being honest. And then sometimes honesty is going to make people not like you. And so now you're in this, what do I do? How do I act as an honest person, but still remain liked, and, all that kind of stuff. And so this gets down to, well, which one do you value more? And one doesn't have to necessarily win. You can actually, if it's unconscious, you end up with these different impulses and what looks like confusion in the moment. I'm confused. What do I do? Do I get really honest with my partner about XYZ that I know is going to hurt them and maybe cause a fight or not be liked? Is it that important? Or do I just let it go? And if I just let it go, I'm not honoring the value that I really hold of being honest, let's say. And so what happens? We end up building inner resentments. And now we're holding these inner resentments that are making me really angry. So now I'm getting angrier and angrier over time. Then something else little happens. It gets piled onto the resentment. And then I've got way too much anger. So now I'm back to, how do I get really honest about this? I want to be my truth, but I really want to get along. I want to, be liked. Right. I said before, but maybe it's just I value getting along in my relationship or something. And so once again, I let it until it's too big. And then the reaction is out of balance for what it's supposed to be, for what happened in that moment, because I haven't been my value the entire time. I haven't been, true in my words and in my actions and all that. And so now I've got a real problem in my life. It's a real problem in my life. I've got real conflict. It might lead to divorce or separation or whatever that is. It could be that I don't know how to navigate that. But the whole time I'm feeling horrible because I haven't resolved how to be, how to put one down and say, hey, I've got to be honest here, and say it in a way where I can still be liked, or resolve it so that both of those values can remain solid.
Right. Because what happens is you end up reacting like somebody who doesn't know what matters, right?
Yes.
Which is, exactly. So maybe going back to the behavioral and espoused values, and my original question that I threw in at the beginning about the difference between values and goals. So I was just thinking about what you were saying, how one is kind of what we claim and who we want to be or who we want to become. And the other is, how we are. And so there's two kind of thoughts that I want to share on that. And then I'll kind of let you speak back to them. But the first one is, I find that interesting because at different areas of your life, that will happen. You will say, here's my values, here's who I am, but how you act and what you value when you're at work on the clock is different than when you're at home as a parent, which is different than when you're alone with your spouse. So there are shifts where you're holding different sets of values for different, circumstances in your life. So that seems like a mismatch between kind of in my head, this is exactly who I am all the time. So yourself, and then, how you act. And then the other part is like that idea of kind of knowing who you want to become, right? Because if someone said, who do you want to be, or how do you want to show up in the world? And I said, I don't know, then that's a sign of, I don't know what matters. So just kind of playing with those two there. I don't know if there's maybe a time where those differences are serving us, or when, how our listeners can notice when that's not serving us or when that's too out of balance. And what's the difference between kind of a value and a goal? So maybe you can.
Yeah. So there's a lot there, and I'll do my best with all of it. The thing that's interesting is values can absolutely be contextual as well. So you can be 100% healthy alone with full agency over your time and attention and everything. And this value seems most important, to be productive in a certain way. And then as soon as somebody you care about's in the room, well, I also value this, that's relational based. And so now that's going to take priority, in this moment or whatever. But if I'm spending too much time doing that and I don't ever kind of honor this other value, now we might get out of balance or do something weird. I think to your point, if we're not clear on what we are and the world is moving us too much, like that's not all mapped back to truly what I value across my life, but I'm showing up as a different person to my friend and my mom and my boss and my, that now I'm not sure what matters to me, and that feels much uglier, right? So it doesn't mean that we're unhealthy if we're, expressing different values at different times. It's just, are they real? Do I really value them? And is it serving the whole me or not? I think that values are usually much bigger and broad, almost like, set of rules isn't exactly right, but let's just say that for the moment.
Mission statement.
Mission statement. Like this is something that I want to be. It's something I like in other people. It's this matters to me. This seems important from my point of view. And then my goals are much more tangible and much more in the doing space, right? So all of a sudden a goal is like, I want this outcome. If my goals are not related to my values at all, they're not going to be meaningful to me, right? What I value is what I find meaningful, okay? So some of the purpose work that we do and getting people like really clear on what is your purpose, what is your mission, right? Whether that's a life mission or whether that's your mission this month, like what is really mattering to you? And then how can we set tangible goals that I fully control, that have real outcomes and all the things that we, could just go look up about quote unquote SMART goals or whatever, where we can say, this is something that I want to do over time. And now if that does map back to my values really clearly, my most important values, I'm going to make time for it. It's going to be easier to do. I'm going to be more drawn to getting it done, et cetera. Okay. So, as a side
can I hop in real quick? I think there's definitely a good tip we can pass off from the listeners, or from what I'm hearing. If you're looking to set goals, and let me give an example of, say, it's a health goal, and maybe you're trying to quit smoking because everybody knows smoking is not good for you, right? It's not a good habit. It's not very healthy. If you can find a reason in there, instead of just saying, well, I know it's not good for me, but it's something I've been doing and I should probably quit. If you can find a way to assign a meaning, we talk a lot about meaning making, a meaning that matters to you. So maybe I want to quit smoking because I don't want to model that behavior for my children, or that little kind of
pivot.
Yeah, the little kind of pivot in your mind, in your mindset. It's the same goal, same behavior to get to the goal, but there's a little bit of a different meaning around it. May be really helpful for those people who are like, I can't hit all these goals.
That's a super good tip. Not only that, whenever you're making your goals up, can you tie them back to what you value about them, right? Like what is the value that is the reason that I'm doing this? Like what's going on here that I can actually say, this is why this matters to me. And if you can't find that, or you don't know, number one, you may not know your values, right? So that's kind of important. But let's say you do know your values and you can't map the goal to it. It may not be something that you want to spend time and energy doing, right? Somehow the complexities of life may have gotten you into a goal that really doesn't matter to you.
Or you're influenced by family origin or partner or work situations where other people are trying to put a value on you that you don't actually value as meaningful.
Yeah, exactly. I think, I don't know how well I'll do this because it was a long time ago that I watched this video, and it's from Simon Sinek, and it's something that I would love to give direct credit to, but I'm not even sure I could find the thing. So I'm just going to butcher this, but I want to give the credit to Simon Sinek because it was his idea originally. And I think that he was talking mostly about kind of like our leaders not leading from values. And part of the reason that he was saying that we do that sometimes is that there's sometimes when we're choosing what to do as a country, or I'll map it to an individual, right? There's like an immediate payoff in what we do. Okay. So there might be like a clear immediate value of, well, obviously if this building's on fire, we need to go put that out, right? That kind of trumps everything. We don't need to have a values conversation about it. Like it's clear. Right. But in our life, it's like, well, these dishes need to be done, so I'm doing the dishes. And then, well, I've got all these emails, so I'm doing these emails. And there's these little payoffs of, well, it's obvious that I need to do this and I'm getting something back. But if our behavior starts being all about those little payoffs and they're not driven by values, it gets really scattered. And all of a sudden we're in a million directions and there's no real kind of path of where our behavior is leading or where we're going or what's happening, right? So politically, if they're trying to win this little thing because it's a budget issue in the moment, or, now they're fighting about this because this is going on, there's not this big, clear mission about where anybody's headed. It's just busy work in all these directions. And maybe it's fixing the day, but it's not like going anywhere, right? And I think what Simon was saying in one sense was that sometimes living from our values is not immediately valuable to us. Like it may be a step backwards in the moment. It may cost us a little bit in the moment. And I think that the example that he used was, military people having the value of bringing home our dead, okay? Just because we value that and we're not going to leave our dead behind. And so you're on the battlefield. If somebody dies way over there, it's maybe not immediately valuable to like run through gunfire to drag that body. Like it may be you'd lose less people if you just left that dead body and left. But we don't do that because we value bringing our dead home. Super important to us.
Right.
Okay? So what do we gain by having that value? Well, all of a sudden, like our fighters may fight differently because they know even if they die, they won't be left behind, right? We have a camaraderie and a teamwork. Like I get chills kind of talking about this, even though I'm not for war and all that stuff, but there's a come together value there of like, you will not be left behind. We're going to do everything we can to get you out of here, right? Alive or dead, but you're coming with us. And there's that's valuable to us. And so in the moment, it may not be expedient or helpful to win that battle, et cetera, but because it's a bigger value of ours, we do it, and it's worth something to us. And so you may value something like honesty, and in the moment, it's not going to give you that payoff of being liked, let's say, but because it's your value, you do the hard thing in the moment that may have immediate cost. It may ruin your night. It might mean that you don't enjoy the movie you were just going to go to because now you're in a fight for the night or whatever. But you're going to gain respect. You're going to gain the trust of your partner knowing who you are. You're not going to carry those resentments going forward. And so there's a bigger game that you're playing because you're living from your values. And it gives you clarity of how I really want to behave if we're connected to them and we know what they are.
Right. Yeah. And that whole kind of talk that you gave about the values of kind of a more universal cause, bringing back the dead, or teamwork, camaraderie,
yeah,
government, who we are as a country, who you are, maybe even in your family unit, who you are at work, kind of these bigger structures. I was also interested to kind of hear about the values through the lens of integral theory type situations, the I, the you, the us, the we, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that kind of touched on that a little
Well,
bit.
it's interesting that you bring up integral theory, which is its own enormous area of study, which I'm not even sure like our listeners know what that is. But at a very basic level, it's sort of honoring different perspectives and saying that, there's an I perspective, there's a you perspective, there's a we perspective, there's a they perspective. And if we get stuck in any one of those perspectives, we have a partial level of truth from that. And it's really, really valuable in a different sense to consider all those perspectives. So was there something about values in that seemed like you
I think it's
more?
just still thinking about the idea that sometimes what we're, where we plant our personal flag and say, this is what I value, it's not always detrimental to then behave along another set of values. Right. So when, what you say, so if you're like, well, I value my life, of course, people are going to say I value my life. But if you're, on the battlefield and you're whoever it is goes down and you're like, I'm going to go get them. Right. You're then acting in a way where you're not fully valuing your life, but you're acting as kind of the greater good. And there are times when I think we have to be.
Well, it's interesting. Let me open that up a little bit, right? Like, what are corporate values?
Right. I was just
if you're part of a corporation, do you align with the corporate values? And if you don't, are you okay with what the corporate values are? So you may know your values and really be in that and be an incredibly productive person, but you end up working for a company that you don't believe in their values. I'm going to say that's probably not going to be your favorite job in the world. That over time, that may rub on you.
You may not be very good at it. You may not be very productive at it. So that's a good kind of check-in for our writers, our listeners that have said, hey, how do I, why don't I feel more satisfaction? Why don't I feel more fulfillment? Like maybe check in there. Like, are you connecting with the meaning and the values, or is somebody putting a set of values on that you don't connect with?
Or is it all about profit at the expense of some other things that really matter to you? And so that feels icky or grimy or whatever. But I think to say that even more clearly, maybe, you did mention that you may sacrifice values to yourself if you're assigning a different we space value, right? So you're in some culture that matters to you, and it may not be the most important thing to you, but it matters to your mom or it matters to your culture. And so in a certain context, you decide really to honor that. That doesn't mean that you're not living into your values, because you're going to have cultural values as well. You're going to have corporate values if you work for a company. You're going to have these different things. And so I almost want to come back and just really say that values are what are valuable, right? Like it's obvious. I mean, it's kind of the same word, but it's not just what's moral and all these things. This is truly what we value. And that's why it's almost universal that money value kind of matters to all of us, right? Like it's something that whether you can be one of those, people who wants to say that you don't like money and she wasn't there and all that. But if there was money there, you'd probably take it. You probably still use it because it's valuable. It's like, it is a representation of exchange and it's something that we need. And so these are in your life besides just money, right? There are other things that you value, and it's really, really important to get in touch with them and do the work to live from them. And if you do that, you become much more productive. You get much more, connected. You're ultimately happier and you suffer less.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And just, I guess kind of the simple takeaways here are that values are flexible.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something
they can be. Yeah.
Yeah, they can be. And you can have different sets of them for different circumstances. So don't get overly expectant to, kind of, and then you have to have the self-awareness to know, does this matter to me?
Mm-hmm.
Because other people saying this should matter to you and you not connecting with it is not you knowing what matters to you. That's you knowing that other people have expectations of what matters to you. So like kind of having that self-awareness, and then it doesn't quite matter as much. You're going to have less of that kind of feeling, that kind of discontent when we're talking about, hey, I've got this value and I've got this value, and now they're crossing, and now I don't know what matters, and I'm behaving in a way that I don't know what matters. So kind of just really like taking the time to check in with what is meaningful to you, and then not locking that in as a forever thing, just realizing that's flexible.
Yeah. And being okay that you may discover one that you didn't see. All of a sudden you find yourself somewhere else and you're like, why is that so triggering to me? Oh, like I really care about this kind of thing, right? This is almost like finding the rules underneath for you, your personal rules to how you would like your life and life out there to go. And if you're unclear about those, that's going to be a problem. So I think probably the big takeaway, unless you have any other big questions, but yeah, I think probably the big takeaway here is at the simplest level, start to go through and look at your, go download like a list of values and just start maybe circling a few of them. Because if you don't know, and if you're already happy in your life and there's no problem going on, then this may not be valuable to you. You may just be like bebopping along and everything's fine. But if you're really struggling with stuff, like getting aligned with what matters to me, is being productive really important to me? Or is, resting being important to me? Is mindfulness really important to me? Like, is being healthy and fit? Is eating right? All these things. And just deciding and knowing, wow, these are what matter to me, that starts to give you a whole lot of clarity in your life. And making sure that in your family, is your family expressing, if you're a parent and you're in control to whatever degree of being a partner and being in your family and raising other people, deciding what your family values are, together, really important. We just had a client, Christina, mention that on one of our calls, and it was brilliant. And
I love that.
So making sure that if you're at a company, checking in with like, what are there any values here? Do they care about anything? I'm sure they value money, but do they value anything else on top of that? Because if they are, if you're going to feel more in your purpose, you're going to feel more aligned with what's going on. And so you may discover that your values are really valuable to you, that this really matters to dial in. And ultimately this leads to a more conscious life, a more purpose-filled life. And work with somebody. You can come and work with us. There's stuff where we can help you not only discover what these are, but shift them around, change them, ultimately find, where am I doing things that are outside my consciousness and holding me back, where I've got a values conflict that I can't even see. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Oh, I was just going to say, because values are really the kind of the context for you, who you are.
Yeah.
They're those guidelines. And not only is it going to help you get through those kind of things that we're hearing, procrastination, overwhelm, stress, but like this is stuff that's going to help you improve your business performance. It's going to help you create better connected relationships. Like there's tangible, it's going to help you with your health. We talked about values and goal setting, and it's going to help you with your financials, like your money and
everything.
There's such tangible things in having a context for like who to be in the world.
Yeah. Let me give you another one that is almost a standard. Like if you're a coach out there or you're in management or you want to do anything, this is almost like a shortcut where you can see a values conflict in almost everybody. Okay. This is almost a universal values conflict, which is really interesting. And actually people in marketing often will use this as a manipulation to kind of speak into these two things and then call you out on it. And so it's almost, anyway, there's a lot to this one, but almost everybody values freedom, right? Freedom for themselves. And if they're, an okay person, probably freedom for other people, like freedom definitely for ourselves. Like we want freedom. We want financial freedom. We want time freedom. We want all that stuff. And so freedom super duper matters to, almost everybody. I would say that's a pretty fair comment. The other thing that we want as souls and individuals and whatever we are is we want impact. We want significance. We want to matter. And so you might be able to see that like freedom and impact can very easily be in conflict, right? The more that I want to have impact, it's hard to like lay around and do that, right? And so in a coaching context, quite often people show up and they don't even realize it, but they're saying like, I want all this freedom, but I've got to have this big business. And like what's happening is there's this huge values conflict between impact and freedom. And my point here is that it's not that one of these needs to win out. It's that you need to help them work in concert, because I promise 10 years from now, you're probably still going to want impact. I mean, I guess as we grow older, maybe we're more and more okay with like my life is what it was and whatever. But certainly for younger adults, we want impact. We want to be powerful and contribute and do.
Well, I think older people experience that as well. I mean, I think
for sure.
Retirement, you're like, okay, now who am I and how do I
exactly
impact the world in a different way? So yeah, I think it's a lifelong kind of desire
for sure. For sure. But hopefully as we age, we become at peace and, it's all that stuff to whatever degree. But the point is that you're going to have these value conflicts. And so understanding them and knowing how they play, deciding that impact is going to matter now so that I can find the financial freedom that I need maybe a little later in my life. Like that's one way. Or how can I, do things so that the actual productive, like, one thing that I point out to people is that you think that freedom of just doing nothing and having that time and space is going to feel amazing, but actually that's not what ends up feeling amazing, right? Doing productive things that matter so that you can have the calm and the vacations that you want to have and these things interspersed with both, that actually is what really changes the meter for you. Because if you had just infinite amount of money and nothing to do and so much freedom over everything, it would feel kind of meaningless. And so, but ultimately that working that out for yourself is a really, really powerful process and really important to do. So there's a ton of these that overlap. If you don't work with us, maybe work with someone or spend some time yourself looking through these and figure out what you value and then do your best to live from them. It's going to be a life changer.
And how can people work with us?
You can go to identityshifting.com. You can go check out, we have a masterclass that is self-study that's amazing, or you can apply to be in one of our next live groups. You can go to robscott.com. There's a lot of ways that you can follow up.
Awesome. Well, thank you personally for this talk because it was very helpful. And I hope to our listeners also, you guys were able to pull some actionable and kind of valuable tips here to help you get better at knowing what is valuable to you.
Awesome. Yeah. Go find your values, guys. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.